I'm Steve. I'm from Microsoft. Despite the odd accent, which you'll at some point figure out, sits somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. Originally from the UK and moved to Microsoft's headquarters in Seattle about 13 years ago. And in 7 weeks' time, it will be my 26th year anniversary at Microsoft, which obviously means I joined the company when I was 12 years old. So that is my only joke. We're going to get started. Thank you for laughing. I'm going to take you back not even a year on this journey with AI. Back in November last year, we started to see headlines like this: how to use the DALL-E AI art generator to create stunning images from text. And the headlines just started to get faster and faster from that point on. Can AI write recipes better than humans, from the New York Times? And then The Guardian weighed in. Can AI make art, and what does it mean for creativity? And then we got to November 30th. And does anybody remember what happened on November 30th last year? Yeah, ChatGPT. This thing came along. First contact with a species from another planet, I think is how I first observed this. And I did probably what many of you in the room did. I started to play around with ChatGPT and ask myself, well, what is this thing? And at the time, my job was working for Brad Smith, who's the president and vice chair of Microsoft and runs all of our public policy work. And so I ran communications for Brad's business. And of course, in that job, I was in the business of creating communications on behalf of Brad. So I thought, well, I'll see if this thing can help me create some communications. And apologies, this text might be a bit too small, but it says, write me an introduction I can give about Brad Smith of Microsoft ahead of a commencement speech he's about to give, including reference to his book, Tools and Weapons. And then I hit enter. And off it went. And I sat back and I read this as you're reading it now. And I sort of went, oh, shit. Like, this thing's really good. I'm like, oh, well, maybe I just got lucky. It just got lucky. So we'll try something else. We'll say, how about translate this into French? And off it went. And I don't speak French, but I'm pretty sure this thing speaks French better than me. So I thought, well, surely it can't be that good. And I said, well, how about just turn that thing into a poem? And off it went. I'm definitely not a poet. I couldn't write anything like this. And so I probably had the same reaction many of you did when you first saw ChatGPT. You had this sort of cold sweat start to appear on your brow and this shiver go down the back of your spine, and you think, this is it, right? This is the end. And what I did the next day is I woke up and I went to my mailbox at the front of my house, which clearly needs to be cleaned because it's got spiders' webs all over it. But this is genuinely the mailbox outside of my front door of my house. And the next day I opened the mailbox, and this is what was inside. Please apply to be a post carrier, or in the UK we would call it a postman. And I thought, this is a message. There is a message here that I need to get out of the communications career and get in to a different element of the communications career, because this ChatGPT thing, it's coming for our jobs. And then I paused for a bit and I started to take a look at what we were talking about inside of Microsoft, and started to see this terminology of Copilot really start to take hold in the company. But not just take hold in the company, started to see it show up inside of products. And so what you'll see in this short video here is just some very fast examples, and I'll show you more a bit later, of how this technology really is a co-pilot. It's not an autopilot. It's not here to replace us. And that's what I want to spend the next portion of time talking about, is about how this technology actually can make our jobs even better, can remove a lot of the repetition, a lot of the drudgery, a lot of the things that we don't like to do in our jobs, like creation of PowerPoint slides or creation of memos or analysis of Excel documents or responding to the thousands of emails we have in our inbox. And we're now in the process of rolling this out widely across Microsoft. And I can tell you, it's having a real impact. Even last week, I wanted to send a memo about my new team at Microsoft. So I now lead a group called the Communications Strategy Team that's focused around how do we apply AI to our business of communications. And I'd been thinking about for 2 or 3 weeks, I want to write a memo. I'm going to send a memo to the whole organization explaining what my team is going to do and the roadmap ahead. But I had what we all have at some point. I had writer's block. I just couldn't get around to getting past the procrastination of writing the first few paragraphs of that memo. I opened up Microsoft Word, as you know, many of us do, and you see a blank page. Anybody know what is the most common thing people do after they open Microsoft Word? They close it straight back down. It's a true fact, because they look at the blank page and they go, ah, and they close it down. And I did that. So I started to write my memo, because I'm much more of a visual communicator. So I started to write my memo in inverted commas inside a PowerPoint. And I created this beautiful PowerPoint deck. And then a week after that, I had the PowerPoint deck. I went back into Word, and Word now has this Copilot feature. And I literally said, create me a memo based on the contents of this PowerPoint slide. Boom. 30 seconds later, it created me the outline, a pretty good 4-page memo. I only used about 40% of the content, I would say, but it got me past that writer's block. And it's exactly the type of thing that we're going to start to see with this Copilot technology. Just 2 weeks ago, we announced Copilot is coming into Windows. So if you're running the latest version of Windows 11, you'll now see this thing, Copilot, on your taskbar. I'm not here to sell you Microsoft products, so I'm going to move past that and talk a little bit about what are we doing inside of Microsoft, what is my team doing to think about how do we reinvent communications with AI. And we're taking a layered approach. The first is we're using Bing Chat Enterprise. And so if you haven't seen Bing Chat, it's very similar to ChatGPT. It's actually based on the same technology. But Bing Chat Enterprise is a significant difference to Bing Chat. Bing Chat is the consumer product that we released on February 7th this year. Bing Chat Enterprise we released quite recently. And the big difference is anything you put into Bing Chat Enterprise stays inside of your organization. So you can take internal confidential documents, you can paste it into Bing Chat Enterprise, you can say, help me summarize this document, or create me a social media post from this document, safe in the knowledge that all of that content stays within inside of your organization. And what we're doing with our communicators, which is over 200 people across the globe, is that we're encouraging them to use this as their daily, what we call research assistant. And I'll show you that a little bit later with a demo. We're also really starting to try and build into our daily workflows these products that are now coming onto the market. So Copilot inside of Microsoft 365 or Microsoft Office, as you may know it. Copilot inside of Viva. We had a new announcement yesterday around Viva Elevate and how we're embedding AI into that product, and Copilot inside of our Dynamics CRM and sales products. So really trying to make this AI technology and this Copilot notion just embedded into the daily workflow of what we do. Most of the energy in my team is going on these two things. Is saying that we want to go and build a new measurement system that utilizes AI, and we want to build a specific Copilot for the communications function. So those are the next two things I'd like to talk about. Our vision for measurement is this. I'm not going to drain everything that's on this slide, but the most important part of this slide is the 3 labels across the top: hindsight, insight, and foresight. And I see the cameras coming out to take a photo of this slide. Wait till you see the next one. The next one is my favorite slide. Everybody's going to photograph that one, I hope. But hindsight, insight, foresight. Most of us who are in the business, certainly of external communications, we spend a lot of time doing hindsight reporting, which is totally fine. We sort of do this, we announce a product, or we have an event, or there is, a key moment for the company, and we'll do a set of reporting. We'll say, how did it land? What was the share of voice? What was the sentiment? What was the, where did we get stories, in which outlets, and what was the reach of those, number of impressions? And so we're all probably very familiar with that side of the business, hindsight. And we buy external products. So right now we work with Cision at Microsoft to deliver most of that capability. Insight, we do some of this work right now. I would say probably 70% of our time is spent on hindsight, maybe 29% of our time is spent on insight, which is creating reports and creating learnings and trying to less focused on a news moment, I would say, or a product or an announcement, but just more analysis of the marketplace. So how are we doing against competitors, or what is the current landscape of AI, and where should we go talk about that? The thing that we don't do is a great deal of foresight, and this is where we think AI has huge potential to allow us to start to add some science to what is currently an art form. What I mean by that is very often inside of Microsoft, when we have a big announcement, the communications leadership team will sit around and we'll say, okay, we have this big announcement, we're going to pitch it to this outlet, the New York Times or Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal. And very often we'll actually pitch it, we'll talk about a specific reporter. And that's because we have lots of expertise and instinct and knowledge and relationships that's built up over many, many years. And we don't want to lose that at all. But what we think we can do is start to create much more what-if scenarios where we can say, well, we have a story that we're trying to reach this particular audience in this particular geography, and ask the system and say, based on everything you have, all of the knowledge of every outlet, every reporter, the media landscape around the world, where would the AI system recommend that we should pitch that story? And so we think there's a lot of potential there, and that's what we're currently starting to build. The second thing that we are doing is this process, is breaking down every process, every major process inside of the communications function that we have. And so I would venture that most people in this room are familiar with this journey. If you're in the business of doing external media and PR, this is a classic journey of how an earned media story. I'm delighted to see more cameras are coming out for this slide. And this might not be exactly how it works in your company, but I would say broadly speaking, this is how it works, right? You come up with a story, you ideate on a narrative, you determine who the audience is, you brainstorm the media targets, you pitch the story, you decide who your spokespeople are going to be, you train your spokespeople on and on and on, down to the end where the story comes out, you do some fact checking, and then you do the reporting on the story. This is the better version of the slide that you should photograph, because this is what we're starting to dwell on, is to say, where can we apply AI across this process? And it's a little bit subtle, but what the shading indicates is where we think there is more or less AI to be applied. So when the story idea is formed, probably not much room for a ton of AI there. But in the brainstorming the media targets, as I just talked about, huge potential for us to use AI much, much more there. Two other things I would call out from this slide. One is you'll see 3 boxes on there that talk about automation. What we've learned through this process of atomizing all of our processes inside of the company is that there are some areas where we're not really going to apply AI, we're just going to apply automation, where we've got these processes that right now are connected processes. For example, in Microsoft, when a story is agreed upon that we're going to pitch, we're going to have a story go out through the media, or indeed just out through our own media, the story will go onto a calendar internally, unsurprisingly. Then what the team who's responsible for that is obliged to do is then write an advisory that gets sent out to the communications field, telling them what they should or shouldn't do. And then the final step in that process is that we do sort of air traffic control to make sure that we're not pitching 20 stories to the same reporter on the same day. Those 3 things are a very joined up process, but right now they're not joined up at all inside of the company. So we're creating a very simple automation process to join those things up and to remove some of the repetition and some of the drudgery that people don't want to do. That's one thing to take away from this slide, is it's not just AI, there's a huge amount of room for automation in our businesses. The second thing to take away from this slide is there are plenty of gaps on here where AI will never be used. We are never going to use AI to train one of our, or to train one of our executives to go and do a media interview. That's always going to be a human interaction. And so we should sort of reassure ourselves, AI is not going to take over the entire process. Lots of the things on here, though, where AI is going to be applied are the things that we don't enjoy doing. They're just repetitive things that AI can help us with. And so in the spirit of showing you a little bit of what we've been doing at Microsoft, about 6 months ago, we built this internal website, and we call it Communications Copilot. So this is not a Microsoft product. It's a set of experiments that my team is making available to the communicators inside of the company. And I'm going to show you a few examples of things that are on this website. The first one of those is what we call the FAQ generator. So this is, it's going to take you through the site. So we'll scroll down. We'll hit on the FAQ generator. Isn't it amazing how we can do this without even touching a keyboard? We're going to go up to a website. So we're going to take the URL for this blog post. So this is a pretty long blog post that Brad Smith, my previous boss, posted back in September around regulation of AI. We're going to paste the URL of that blog post in, and then we're going to pick a reporter's name, in this case, Kara Swisher, hit submit. And what you'll see on the right-hand side in a moment is it will tell us who is Kara Swisher, what's Kara's position being on Microsoft, but then more importantly, it gives us 5 questions that we think Kara Swisher will ask about this content, 5 tough questions. Notice it doesn't give us the answers. That's where our profession has to come in and provide those answers. But this gives us a great starting point for being able to think about, dependent on this content and this particular reporter, what are the difficult questions this person is going to ask? And for me, that's a lot of, repetitive work that our teams do. So you can start to see where that might be useful. The second one I'll show you is the social media post generator. We're going to do a similar thing. We'll go to an announcement Microsoft made back in August around an agreement with Epic to expand AI into healthcare. We'll take that URL, paste it into the screen, hit submit, and what you'll see on the right-hand side is it will give us a suggested tweet, or whatever we call tweets these days, with some hashtags and a suggested LinkedIn post, and also some suggested images to use with that content. Now, to be clear, we're not using this in production right now, but what it is providing is a great way to get ideas and inspiration and do things like, test A/B headline test or social media post generation test. So it's a great playground for our teams to say, well, just give me some ideas of what a social media post would look like, and then I can take those ideas and I can iterate on them and improve them. The third one I'll show you is possibly my favorite on this site right now. It's called the YouTube Transcript Summarizer. So we're going to go to YouTube. This is an interview that Andrew Ross Sorkin from The Times did with our CEO, Satya Nadella. Paste in the URL, hit transcribe, and it will transcribe that interview. But now, more importantly, what I can go and do, and it does a very good job of transcription, is I can now start to ask questions of that transcription. So in this case, I'm going to say, what does Satya say about the benefits of AI? Click on ask. And it will go through the content in the transcript, and then it will provide me an answer to my question. This is what Satya said about the benefits of AI. I don't use this to go and look at my CEO's speeches and interviews, because most of those I watch. The reason this is incredibly helpful for me is all of the keynotes and other events that I never get to see because I'm busy or I can't attend a conference, but it allows me to go and see what our competitors are talking about. So I can go and take the latest interview from Andy Jassy from AWS, paste it in here, and then ask a question and say, did Andy talk about Microsoft in this interview? So it gives me a way to be able to not have to watch a 2-hour keynote or a 30-minute interview. I can just go and interrogate it through a text-based interface. This is something that's available right now. So this is external. If you're using the Microsoft browser, which is called Edge, you may have seen in the top right-hand corner this button here, which is Bing. And it brings up this Bing sidebar, Bing Chat Enterprise. And in this case, what we have is a 44-page PDF about safe and responsible AI in Australia. I'm not going to read the 44-page PDF, but when I was preparing one of my executives for this, I can simply go in and say, according to this PDF, what are the top 3 things Australia can do to manage AI? And it will start to give me answers right here, and I can copy and paste those directly from this. So this is available right now. You can go and use this if you're using the Edge browser and Bing Chat Enterprise. So that's Communications Copilot. It's inside of Microsoft right now. It's something we're playing around with. We're not selling it, though I'm interested to see who would buy it, because one day I might sell it. But this is the direction we're going. This is what my team is trying to build inside of Microsoft, which ultimately may become a product. I hope it does. And it captures some of the things that I've just shown you. But for those of you who are familiar with Microsoft Teams, this is what a Teams interface would look like if you're not familiar with it. Right now, I have a Copilot inside of Teams. So it's literally a kind of conversational agent I chat with. And we're in the process of creating an interface like this that would allow us to give people 3 categories of things. One is to allow self-service reporting, to allow people to say, just build me a report on the insights around AI, or what are the biggest headlines on AI in the market today, or build me a report on the competitive landscape for IoT, or build me a report on. So we're trying to provide self-service reporting and measurement capability through a conversational interface. On the right-hand side, what we're doing is trying to provide an interface into the community at Microsoft of communicators. We have a website that's called Comms Central. So it's our community website inside of the company, and it runs on SharePoint. And there are lots of very useful documents in there, documents, narratives, FAQs, videos, recordings, but it's a very big site, and it's hard to find things quickly. Last week, I wanted to very quickly find what is our current statement inside Microsoft on copyright and AI. And I know it's on that site somewhere in a document. But what I want to be able to do is literally what's on the screen here is to say, give me the talking points on X, and it will search across that content and give me the answer directly without me having to go and find it, or help me understand what's on the calendar next week. All of our news calendar is hosted on that same internal website. So we want to provide an interface to allow people to go and interrogate the calendar just through a conversational interface. And then finally, this piece in the middle around creation. Help me write a briefing document for. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Help me generate a transcript. Every time I do host a media interview with one of my executives, I'm sure as you all do, you put your phone down, you record the interview, and then you transcribe it afterwards. That at the moment even at Microsoft, is a very manual process. And just last week, my team, through a very simple tool that is free and available to everybody here who runs Windows 10 or 11, there's a tool on your PC called Power Automate Just last week, we automated 60% of that process, and it took us about 30 minutes. So we can now just say, I've got my audio file, I'm going to send it to an email address, and about 10 minutes later, I'll get an email back with a Word attachment that has the full transcript of that content. That's incredibly simple to do. But the briefing document is, in some ways, the high watermark of what we think is possible with AI. And I'm sure many people in this room have seen a briefing document for an executive to meet with the media, and they all look the same. It basically says, here's the engagement details, time, etc. Here's the person that you're going to meet with, the reporter and the outlet. Here are the last 5 stories that they wrote. Here's the narrative that we want you to try and land with this media and this outlet and this reporter today. And then here's a whole series of Q&A that they may ask you about difficult topics. And really, the only thing that's unique in many ways in that document is here's the narrative we want you to land today. Most of the other things in there are quite repetitive from document to document. Once you've seen one briefing document, you've seen most of them. So this is what we are currently in the process of building at Microsoft. It's an interface that lets you do this. Create a briefing document for Kevin Scott, who's our CTO, to talk with Cade Metz about AI futures. And we think we can get to this relatively quickly, that we can interrogate the web, and we know who Cade is. He's a reporter for the New York Times. We can also identify what's the recent coverage that Cade has written about. So that's, again, looking at external content on the web. And then we can say, these are the talking points that we would suggest, and here's the Q&A that we pull from internal documents. And so we're in the process of building that. And we think it's going to remove a huge piece of repetitive business inside of both our function and a huge piece of repetitive business that we pay some of our PR agencies to handle on our behalf. And so that's a little bit of a sort of look behind the scenes at what we are doing at Microsoft and how we are implementing AI inside of our communications business. And so what I'd like to do now is leave you with a bit of a message from an alien life form.
But what is it specifically about the internet? I mean, anybody can say anything. And it all adds up to what? I mean, it seems to me there's nothing cohesive about it in the way that there was something cohesive about the youth revolution in music.
Oh, but absolutely. Because I think that we, at the time, up until at least the mid-70s, really felt that we were still living under the, in the guise of a single and absolute created society where there were known truths and known lies, and there was no kind of duplicity or pluralism about the things that we believed in. That started to break down rapidly in the 70s, and the idea of a duality in the way we live. There are always 2, 3, 4, 5 sides to every question. That the singularity disappeared, and that, I believe, has produced such a medium as the internet, which absolutely establishes and shows us that we are living in total fragmentation.
You don't think that some of the claims being made for it are hugely exaggerated? I mean, when the telephone was invented, people made amazing claims.
I know, the president,
for example.
The president at the time when it was first invented, he was outrageous. He said he foresaw the day in the future when every town in America would have a telephone. Now how dare he claim like that? Absolute bullshit. No, you see, I don't agree. I don't agree. I think the internet, I don't think we've even seen the tip of the iceberg. I think the potential of what the internet is going to do to society, both good and bad, is unimaginable. I think we're actually on the cusp of something exhilarating and terrifying.
It's just a tool, though, isn't it?
No, it's not. No. No, it's an alien life form.
What do you think, I mean, when you think then about the
future... Is there life on Mars? Yes, it's just landed here.
But it's simply a different delivery system there. You're arguing about something more profound.
Oh, yeah, I'm talking about the actual context, and the state of content is going to be so different to anything that we can really envisage at the moment, where the interplay between the user and the provider will be so in simpatico. It's going to crush our ideas of what mediums are all about.
I do miss David Bowie. So that was shot in 1999, and some of you may or may not know the interviewer Jeremy Paxman, who's a sort of famous British interviewer and incredibly belligerent. He was like a Piers Morgan interviewer, but I love that he's basically just goading Bowie into saying, the internet's just going to be this little trifling thing, right? It's not going to be important. But my point in showing that video is, I think you could, every time he says internet in there, you could take it and replace it with AI. And we're at a similar moment where I do think it is, as David said, it's exhilarating and terrifying. So, I think some days I wake up and I'm like, what is this technology? What are we going to do with it? And so I'll leave you with this. What do I think communicators should do in this new era of AI? The first is to experiment and pioneer. That's exactly what we're doing in Microsoft. And, we may be slightly ahead of you, we may be slightly behind you, but if we're ahead, we're not that far ahead. We're inventing some of this technology, but we are, I think as a discipline, we are in the early sort of foothills, if you like, of what we can do with AI and what this technology is going to mean for our profession. But I'm firmly of the view that I think it has a huge amount of positive impact. There are going to be some downsides. There always are downsides with technology. The same is true with the invention of the steam engine. The same is true with the invention of the printing press. The same is true with the invention of lots of different technologies. There will be perceived downsides, but I think there's a ton more upsides. But I do think it's important to get out there, to experiment, to pioneer, to play with all of the technologies, not just the Microsoft technologies. There are lots of companies, lots of our competitors who are bringing technologies into this arena, and it is still, relatively early days. But do operate with a sense of urgency. Don't be intimidated by the technology. Think of it as being your research assistant. I operate most days. My setup at home and in the office is two screens. So a screen in landscape mode and a screen in portrait mode. And my portrait mode screen right now always has Bing Chat Enterprise open. And I'm trying to get myself into this modality of saying this is going to be my permanent research assistant. I can just ask it questions and ask it for advice throughout the day. And I saw a great quote last night, actually, from one of our Microsoft executives who said, don't treat this thing like a search engine. Treat it like your new direct report, which I think is a great way to think about this technology. But think Copilot, not autopilot, because that's what this technology is. It's here to augment and support the work that we do, not to replace the work that we do. And at the same time, don't lose sight of the value in our profession. I talked earlier on about using AI to try and determine who we should pitch a story to. It can help us and it can support us in that process, but it will never replace the relationships we have with the media and the instincts that we have around where is the right place to tell a story and when is the right time to not do a story. It's not going to replace sitting down with an executive and briefing them for an interview. And so there's a huge amount of expertise that is never going to be replaced by this technology, and we shouldn't lose sight of the value that we bring, whilst at the same time inviting some of this science into our process and also using it to remove some of the repetition and some of the drudgery that I talked about earlier on. I do think as communications leaders, in some ways, the culture change and the change management is going to be the most difficult thing, is to take people on this journey, to take our organizations, to take the people that work for us on this journey to say, hey, this is a new technology and we're going to have to embrace it or we're going to get left behind. And so I think putting as much energy into the change management and the culture change as you put into the experimentation and the adoption of technology, I think will be incredibly important. And so with that, I will say thank you. You laughed at my joke. I tried not to do too many more. And I hope that was useful. And I think we've got time for some Q&A. Thank you. All right, lots of questions. Fantastic. We'll start over here.
Teresa Schumann from Eli Lilly and Company. My mind is like completely blown and like geeked out about this. I'm curious about any research your team is doing for internal communications, like taking some of those briefing document and, what did the speaker say to this particular team last year versus what did we write for the leader to say? Like any type of research that you guys are doing from an internal comms perspective?
I wouldn't say so much research that we're doing, and I'll answer it a slightly different way because you've reminded me of a topic that I meant to talk about, which is, and I'll probably end up putting it on that last slide when I do the next version of this talk, is I think one of the most important things this is teaching us is we need to get our data landscape way much more in order. And so, I have probably 500 briefing documents on my computer or in my cloud on my OneDrive. and I have all of the supplementary 500 transcripts from those on my PC or in my cloud. And that's not where they should be. They should be in this central store that we can start to mine and to reason over and to apply AI to allow us to get a lot more insight and extract it out of those. So that's been a really, really big learning for us. Is that you would think that Microsoft, they're incredibly well organized, and of course they run this amazing technology super tanker, and it all runs perfectly well. It runs well. Perfectly is not where we're at. And so we have a lot of work to do just within our own function, frankly, to sort of get our data landscape much, much more organized to allow us to take the benefits of AI. So if I didn't quite answer your question, maybe I can catch you afterwards, but that's what it reminded me to talk about. Thank you. Straight back here.
You may have already, I'm Kent Landers from Hilton. You may have already answered this question, but the Copilot that's rolling out in the coming weeks that I think a lot of Microsoft enterprise users are testing, does it include this communications functionality you're talking about, or is that a next generation? Like, what are we going to see in this first iteration that we can get commercially?
Yeah, I think so. What you will see, everything I've shown you here is internal Microsoft stuff. So it's not necessarily secret, but it's secret-ish. There aren't that many people who've seen what you've just seen, and it's us playing around with the technology internally. And so I'd say a couple of things. One is we are looking at how do we go and build a solution similar to what I've just shown you, build a solution for the communications team at Microsoft. To me, it would sort of stand to reason if we're going to build that for the communications team at Microsoft, it might be something that other communications orgs in this room might like to buy or use. And so I'm busy sort of working on that. And so I may come back to you next year and say, I've got something to sell you. But in the meantime, the truth is, everything I've shown you, all it really is a thin veneer on top of the technology that's already out there. So the social media post generator is a great example. You can go and do that in ChatGPT right now. You can take a URL, post it into ChatGPT or Bing Chat Enterprise and say, please create me a social media post from this. All that we are doing is adding this layer on, which I think is important in many ways. So I'm not trying to minimize the work we've done, but is to create, lower the barriers of entry, maybe I'll put it that way, for our communications community, that they literally have to click a button. They don't have to go to Bing Chat Enterprise or ChatGPT. They just go to this website, and ultimately they'll go to Teams, and they'll be able to do it right there. And so nothing I've shown you, with the exception of things like the briefing document, which is a much more complicated scenario because it's a multi-step prompt that connects to multiple different systems simultaneously. But most of the other things that I've shown you, the YouTube transcript summarizer, I'm pretty sure you could probably do that just with smart prompting inside of Bing Chat. And so the short answer is the Copilot that will roll out is rolling out right now. You could do many of these things right there, but most of them will be through manual prompting versus a guided experience.
So I guess I'll go next. I'm Evan Krause from APCO. How are you? Thank you for the presentation. I think it's very inspiring for the folks in the room, answers a lot of questions. You showed two different kinds of applications and use cases. One is a controlled environment where you're summarizing a fixed transcript or something like that. You did others where it's more creative and more exploratory and using a broader set of sources. We help a lot of our clients manage through this transition, and one of the questions we get a lot is, how do we control the accuracy? The learning models are inferring a lot of things from what they're finding, and sometimes those sources are bad, and we're entering an environment where there's a lot of intentional misinformation. I just saw reports today about the war in the Middle East where there's a lot of misinformation being distributed. So how do we protect ourselves from that? What's your counsel on how to give some assurances as people use these tools that what's being sourced is right and what's being inferred is right?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I think, the short and somewhat pithy but actually honest answer is AI is not an opportunity for us to, park our brains. It's a tool that is going to help us accelerate and get things done more quickly, but we still have this responsibility to check the content, to check it for facts, to make sure that it is right, to make sure that it factually is correct, tonally is correct. And so we're not using any of these tools ourselves right now in sort of automated production. And I don't think we will for a long time, maybe never, is to say that, these are tools that are going to help us with ideation and creation, But ultimately, there's always going to be a need for humans to check the content, for not just for accuracy, but also for things like tonality and for language and stuff like that. And so I think that's the very simple guidance: is they are great tools, but they are not a replacement for the work that we all do in this room, which is to create content that accurately and honestly and truthfully represents the companies that we represent. Let's go ahead.
Yeah, I've got the mic. I think there's probably three of us who know who Jeremy Paxman is. My question, and it's not a Microsoft, having to go Microsoft, but the critique of reporters, Kara Swish and many others, is that big tech wants a high degree of control and is not always that open. There are very important business reasons for that. I get the productivity tools. I suppose my question is there any concern that you lose authenticity, distinctiveness, particularly at an individual spokesperson level, if everything is so buttoned up, everything is so organized, that ultimately reporters end up thinking, what different will I get from this? Because the truth is, big media is also in an arms race on their side to try to work out what this means for them. So, but fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll say two things. One is I think, but more importantly, I hope the answer is no. Because, and partly from a technical point of view, let's say we were to take every transcript of every interview that our executives have had, and we could put them into a system, we could train the system. What you would then end up with actually is more accurate output that isn't generic. If I go to Bard or Bing or ChatGPT right now and ask me to come up with a set of responses that I would give a reporter, it will give me some relatively generic content. One of the beauties of AI is I can train or so-called fine-tune that on my own content. And so I don't want to end up in that position. I hope we're not going to end up in that position. And it's sort of connected back to the last question is ultimately this is a tool to help us. It's not a tool to replace us. And I think that is beholden on all of us in this room, is to protect and cherish the craft that we all bring to this, is to say this isn't a tool to replace us. My example early on of I created that memo from PowerPoint. It helped me get through writer's block. It helped me get a head start. But ultimately, if you went and read that document as my team did, they know it's written by me because it has my tonality and my language and my sort of my style of writing in there. And so that is something I think it's up to us to protect, but also it's, at least from a Microsoft point of view, that's not the direction that we're trying to take this, is to say that this is going to replace us and everything that gets genericized. Hence this whole notion of copilot versus autopilot. If we head down the autopilot path, we're on the wrong path. Let's go over here. I'm picking here as if I have some power over picking. I'm just like, I don't really. Just whoever's next.
It's Rachel Kashnak from Fleisch und Hillard. So you talked about the importance of culture change and being prepared for that. My question is around what is the runway for change? Because unlike the internet, I think that the speed of change is a lot faster, and therefore disruption is going to be a lot bigger potentially at a faster pace. So what are your predictions on how long we've got to actually get our house in order?
Oh God, predictions. Predictions are always hard because I think it's probably longer than we think. The speed of adoption has been incredible of ChatGPT, for example. So you look at that and you go, wow, things are changing really quickly. But we've now had this technology for almost a year, and it would be interesting to see who's using it in anger or in production inside of the organizations in this room. But I think we've got a few things I sort of bring together. Is, as I said earlier, I do think we're in the sort of early foothills of this technology. It's changing every day. So the models are going to get better. The so-called hallucinations are going to start to diminish. The applications of the technology are going to get much more varied. The latest version of Chat or GPT last week, GPT with Vision, is unbelievable. The things that you can do with that creates entirely new scenarios. And so I think the runway is at least the next 3 years, which I don't know if that sounds too long or too short, but I don't think that we are going to be back here in this room in a year's time all saying, wow, we're all, using this on a regular daily basis in our roles, I think if I pick the team inside of Microsoft, the tools that we're building for, I think we'll be significantly further on in the adoption of things like Comms Copilot and in the use of it on a daily basis as a regular part of our process. But right now, I'd say they're probably less than 50% of our communicators are using this on a regular daily basis. And that's not a criticism. It speaks to the culture change needs to happen. So I think we've got at least 3 years of runway until this really starts to dramatically shift what we do. But I'm happy to be wrong on that as well. Let's go back here and then we'll come down here.
Hi, Amanda Lake with Vanguard. This is very exciting. I'll just echo what everyone has said. I'm curious about, embracing and experimenting, I think is really important for those of us in the room and for the team that we're leading. I'm curious about your perspective on how to do that in a safe way. Obviously, a lot of us are dealing with things that even internally are highly confidential. And having something like Chat Enterprise can obviously help because it's not going to go into an external database. But just would love to hear your perspective on how to experiment in a sort of risk-averse, safe way.
Yeah, I think there are two things I would say to that. One is being Chat Enterprise. That's exactly why it was built, is to allow people to not have fear and trepidation around where is this content going. And so you can go and experiment in a safe way. And then the second thing is we've certainly done this inside of our team in partnership with our main PR agency, is to create a task force. And I know lots of other companies have done that. It's just create a smallish for us task force of people who it is their job to go and do the experimentation and then report that back out to the rest of the function. And so we're trying to encourage everybody to play with this technology, but we're also taking a smaller group and saying your job is to be 2 or 3 steps ahead of everybody else and be able to report from slightly further up in the foothills back to the team on what are the best uses of this. So those are the 2 things I would suggest. I'll go over here.
Hi, good morning. Adrienne Gianforti from History Factory. You mentioned Kara Swisher as an example of a reporter that you would maybe want to summarize her questions for. She's tough, so I applaud you for trying to attempt to do that. She's quoted saying that it's not the AI tool that she's afraid of, it's the people who control them. Paraphrasing, of course. But she, to that end, how much oversight and regulation do you think is required of the people who are creating these tools, and thus, sort of fallout from that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And we've been very clear as a company that we think that this technology does need regulation. My previous boss, Brad, I was in DC with him back in May, right ahead of him going to the White House and talking at the White House with the president and others around the need for regulation of this technology. And the way that we have, and we've created a set of our own commitments. We signed up to a set of voluntary commitments that the White House put out. We've also taken those commitments around the world. So most recently to India, we've got a set of commitments that we're laying out in Europe. We think there's a lot of work around cross-boundary jurisdiction that's going to be needed because AI doesn't really know any boundaries, and so that I think is going to be difficult. But we've been very clear that we do think there are lessons to be learned from the lack of regulation around social media and the impact that that's had on society as well as our business as communicators, I mean. And so yeah, we've been very, very clear that we do think there is need for regulation, and we've talked about this notion of a handbrake on this technology. Because there are others who are calling to stop the advancements of this technology because they think that it has potential future harms. We don't think it's necessary to stop the technology because we think there's a huge amount of potential with it, but we do think there is this requirement to have a so-called handbrake that allows us to very quickly say, hang on a second, let's pause because we're seeing a negative impact from the technology. In particular, sort of less so in the communications discipline, but as the AI starts to get applied to other systems and starts to get connected to automated systems, things like power grids or water supplies or things like that, for good and beneficial reasons, that's where you absolutely want to be able to have the ability to put the handbrake on incredibly quickly if things start to go awry. But the short answer is that we are may be surprising to some people, but we are literally calling for regulation of this technology and supportive of it. And then the other thing I would say is that we have spent the last 7 years as a company working on what we call responsible AI guidelines. And we published those last year. Those have been applied internally to all of our products. All of our products that we ship have to go through a very rigorous set of testing around the sort of security and transparency and accountability that's built into those technologies. And so all of our engineers have to go through training and a process to be able to build AI-based technologies responsibly. And last year we published those guidelines externally to share them with customers and say, hey, for other customers who are either using or building AI, we're very happy to share how we're approaching sort of the responsible approach to AI. Down here.
Brian DeAngelis with Penta. Fascinating presentation.
Thank you.
I have a question on just the evolution of really the inputs, and if you see the competitive landscape making it harder either for folks like us to get past IP paywalls, or even competitors. You showed YouTube. Will they sort of pull back and try to limit what AI tools can pick up their content?
I think the inputs, I don't know if I'm going to answer your question right, so feel free to tell me otherwise. Inputs-wise, I'm fascinated with visual, well, maybe I'll answer it this way, is what we'll start to see, I think, is the so-called modalities begin to intertwine. And so right now, there is a modality that we have, which is we input text and we get back text. There is another modality with things like DALL-E and Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, where you input text and you get back an image. I think we'll start to see those get much more combined, where you can input an image and get back text, or you can input an image and get back an image. So we'll start to see that landscape change quickly. I was looking yesterday at the latest GPT Vision stuff, and it's pretty damn cool. Like I saw somebody point a camera at a lunch they had bought, which was fish tacos, or is it tacos or tacos? I think it's tacos, fish tacos. And they said, how many calories are in this dish? And it did an incredibly good job. Like it said, this is a taco and it has this much calories, and the fish has this much calories, and the sauce on top of it has this much calories. And that might seem like a trivial thing, but for certain people, that's actually incredibly useful. For people who've got medical conditions, for example. We've been using that technology to help the low vision and blind community for a long time. So Microsoft built an app several years ago that uses AI to allow that community to be able to, frankly, navigate through the world and be able to go into a grocery store, point their camera at things in the grocery store and say, tell me what this is, or help me find this particular aisle, or can you tell me the ingredients on this canned item. And so that, I think, is, I don't know where all of that goes, but I think it's a fascinating setup. The other one I saw actually was somebody had pointed their camera, they'd lifted up the hood of their car, which had steam coming out of it, and they shot a video and they said, tell me what's wrong with this car. And it did a pretty good job of diagnosing what was wrong with the car. And so you start to think about that, and then my mind then starts to go actually much, much broader around, what is the real potential for this technology? And I think we're at time, so I'm going to leave you with this. One of the dreams I have with this technology, having 10 years ago or 8 years ago, I spent some time in Kenya with our CEO talking about technology and how it can change people's lives. At that time, we were bringing Wi-Fi to schools in rural parts of Kenya, and it literally changed people's lives. But you think about this technology and its potential to give every school kid around the world a personal tutor, which might not seem that important in suburban America, but once you get out into rural America, and certainly when you get out into the continent of Africa and other places, the ability to give every kid a high-quality personal tutor, that is one of the dreams, I think, of this technology that has just profound impact positively for society. And so maybe that's a great place for me to finish.